Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
In this episode, we speak with Hans Baars about experiencing the divine in all things, the importance of the experience of the sacred over conceptual frameworks, and making connections between different religious traditions. Hans shares his unique perspective as a former Dutch Franciscan priest in Pakistan, an educator, publisher, and translator of 3 books on St. Francis of Assisi.
You can get this episode's show notes, read a short story by Hans, and join our email list at noblemindpodcast.com. We hope you enjoy our conversation as much as we did. We are here with Hans Baars, originally from the Netherlands, now of Melbourne, Australia, a former Franciscan priest, and a current practitioner of meditation, mindfulness, self-compassion, as well as a practicing Catholic. Welcome.
Thank you.
Why don't we get started talking about your background?
What is my background? My background is A, religious, B, Roman Catholic, C, Franciscan. Not necessarily in that order, because I think the third one, the Franciscan bit of it, is predominant.
Could you tell us a little bit about what that entails? I've heard the term before, but I don't know a lot about what it means to be Franciscan.
Francis was a man who lived about over 800 years ago. It's been a while. And he was the one who, for the first time, made Christmas crib on the Christmas day to show everybody how God became man. That goes back to his, call it philosophy or theology, or his way of living. That's probably the better way to put it. And that is basic for his attitude towards the whole of creation, including, of course, mankind, men and women and children, but also all living things, all not living things, whatever it is all God who is with us. Emmanuel, that is the original Hebrew word for God with us, and that's one of the names which is given to Jesus Christ, the God who is with us. And he, Francis, saw that in everything. And when he prays the prayer of the way Jesus taught it, according to the Gospels, Our Father is the Father of everything. And he writes a very famous Canticle of the Son, or the Canticle of all beings, where he calls everything under the sun his brother and sister. All the good things and all the bad things are my brothers and sisters, because they are all children of the same God who is the Father of all. That is the way he did put it, in fact. And interestingly, there may be something else that's involved there, maybe the same thing. When he talks about the earth, he calls the earth, and he puts it all in terms of a prayer of gratitude. I thank you, God, for Sister Mother Earth. He calls it sister and mother at the same time. Goes to show what is going on in his mind when he puts words to his experience of creation. It's all sisters and brothers, but it's also mother. Well, that sort of, for me, sums up a little bit how I also would like to think about the whole of creation and all the environmental things that have been going on in the past number of years. They appeal to me so much because it's my world. It's the world where I am and share my being with all those brothers and sisters, which include men and women, animals, the birds, the trees and the flowers and the bushes, but also the rocks and the rivers and the oceans, and the stars and the totality of the universe.
That would seem consonant with Thich Nhat Hanh's views, perhaps.
Very much. What I know of him, I only know of him because of what I hear about him. But the term of interbeing comes from him, I understand. And interbeing being in the original Latin word is to be is esse, E-double-S-E. And interesse, that is where the word interest comes from. I have an interest in you, that means I am inter with you. That's the inter being.
Interesting. Interesting.
Interesting, indeed.
Recently, did you get into mindfulness and then self-compassion?
The mindfulness as such, I came to know about it only about, about 12, 13 years ago. But before the term mindfulness, well, it became a popular kind of thing, but I say 20 years ago, the word mindfulness, I wonder whether it existed. I didn't know about it anyway. And meditation, one of the things, as a Franciscan friar, especially in my training years, the daily routine had twice a day, half an hour of meditation. But I remember once asking John Julian about that, because the meditation, which is part of the mindfulness practice, is not quite the same as what I did and we did as such. And John said, what you did was more contemplation. Now, I'll be the last one to quibble about the word, but I see there is a difference, because the contemplation is a thing or a person or a situation or an experience outside yourself, which you, as an outsider, sort of look at and contemplate. It's a bit rational, whereas the mindfulness is more what happens to myself when I am contemplating. So the meditations we did, I'm saying we because of the other friars who were there, that was the person of Jesus Christ, his teachings, the Catholic teaching, more rational than experiential, if I may put it that way. Whereas the mindfulness, I picked that up very quickly because it's something that is very closely related, only it's got a different approach to the whole thing. It is what happens to yourself when you are with yourself. Now, that's a thing which appealed to me a lot, and I mean, because way back when I was studying theology, we did have some spare time, and we filled it up with playing volleyball, for instance. That was one of the things we did. But also some particular field of interest which you might have, which was not covered by the syllabus. In the syllabus, you had dogmatic theology and moral theology and church law and all that kind of thing. But I got interested in Hindu philosophy. That was my extracurricular activity, kind of. I remember once giving a long lecture to all my classmates. That was one of the things you were supposed to do. So a kind of a thesis kind of thing. And that was all about the concept of bhakti. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Devotion.
Yeah, it's not easy to translate it. The first translation word comes to mind is just love. But then not just the interpersonal thing, but much wider than that, because it's also connected to the Atman is Brahman. My being, what I am, the being I am, is the same thing as the being of all that is. That's a very basic Hindu concept, and I'm not even quite sure whether I put it the right way, but that's the way I put it for myself. I am, and that being of my being is the same being as the being of everything that has being or is.
Now, you also have a great amount of love for languages.
Oh,
you have
yes.
studied multiple languages.
That's right. I lost a lot of it because it's been such a long time ago. And one of the languages, of course, was English. And the way we learned the languages in those days was only in order to be able to read the language, not to speak it. So when I went to Pakistan in 1959, I knew English, all right, but I had never spoken it. And yet I managed to have my first sermon in English around Christmas, 3 months after I reached Pakistan.
Could you tell us just a little bit about how you ended up in Pakistan?
I had wanted to go to India because of those extracurricular activities, study Hindu philosophy, and that appealed to me a lot. But India had just in 1947 had become an independent India, and I'm talking just 10, 12 years later than that. India was not very keen on having Catholic missionaries entering the country. So that was out. The second option was Indonesia, but they didn't want any Dutch people there because they had just fought their freedom from the Dutch colonial powers at about the same time, 47, 48. So then I said, well, then it's Pakistan, that's same area, it's about the same thing. So that's how I landed up in Pakistan.
I've attended some comparative theology lectures between Hinduism and Christianity, and that's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, there have been people. I've got one or two books by the British, Beat Griffiths or something, but he really started digging into the Hindu philosophy and the Hindu theology and the concept and the experience of the divine, not so much of God, but of the divine in whatever happens to you and whatever you find in your life. And that's something that appeals to me very much. Yeah.
It sounds really fruitful and rich to seek an awareness of the divine in all of our experiences. How do you do that?
How do I do that? How have I done it over the years?
Yeah. Something you sense, something you say, something you do, just some awareness that flickers on. I don't know.
It's more in terms of the last thing you said, an awareness. The awareness that there is a being in me, a being, not the word as a noun, but as a present participle. That's the being. And that being is the being of everything else. So in the evenings, when I go to bed and I try to meditate myself into sleep, I'm just making myself aware of being.
So the living, the being, the aliveness,
yeah. And that comes to, at certain moments, it comes to a point that it's quite overwhelming. Being aware of being the same being as everybody else and everything else. And I suppose that also links up with compassion, though I'm still not comfortable with the word, that may be because of my language background.
The word compassion?
Self-compassion. Compassion is fine for me. Compassion is passion in the sense of suffering, which you share. Com is together, like in community. So compassion, I understand compassion. I feel compassionate about blah, blah, etc. But self-compassion, in terms of language, is not a word that appeals to me. I wish there were a better word for the experience of being happy with yourself, because that's basically what it is. And that's something that I've had to learn because of the religious Catholic Church, etc. background, where too often you are told that you're no good. And as a therapeutic tool to be able to say to yourself, okay, I did wrong, but that wasn't quite right what I did, but it's okay, you can live with that. You're not the only one who do stupid things. And I find it hard to call that compassion, because that's compassion with myself, and I'm only one me. So you professionals find a better word.
I see. All of your languages, I don't know, you seem well positioned to pitch one.
The funny thing is the seventh language that I learned a little bit of, not enough to my regret, that is Urdu. That's the national language of Pakistan. And there they have the word for compassion is hamdard. Ham is the personal pronoun for we, and dard is pain or suffering. So hamdard is the same word, sympathy. Sympathy is the Greek word for compassion. And Urdu has got hamdard.
It's funny how when you look at the words in different language that point in the same direction, they all sort of, it's like facets of a diamond or something. They all sort of shine on it, give you a different way of thinking of the same idea or experience.
I too have had the experience of taking part in religious ceremonies, and also when one is in nature, one has a sense of the divine.
Yeah. The details, even the major details of a religious, or in my case, the Catholic religion, they are no longer very important. The basic thing of the experience of the togetherness of everything and the interconnectedness of everything, that's for me much more basic, though love thy neighbor as thyself is definitely a very essential part of that. But it's something that's built upon that lower foundation of everybody is with me in the same beingness. That's probably one of the reasons I decided that I didn't want to carry on working as a Catholic priest, was that a number of those, call it upper layer details, they are not unimportant, because it gives guidance and direction to people's lives, and it gives direction to my life even. But it's not the basic thing. It's not what I want to talk about. It's not what I experience from day to day. Maybe I should tell you that about 10, 12 years ago, I went for a week in an Aboriginal village, very close to the famous Uluru.
The rock in central Australia, right?
That's right. Where we were having our lectures from this man and from one of the Aboriginal elders, who was just a few years older than I was at that time. He died by now. And the topic was what they call in some of the Aboriginal languages, because there are a lot of them, they call it kanyini. And that's the same idea of interconnectedness. Everything is interconnected on some level. And if you live on that level, you appreciate everything that is on that level where you are and everything is. And I had this whole week there, and it's been an experience indeed, because in the presentations we had there and the sort of exercises we did, you could feel that interconnectedness. And you can, in certain contexts, you call that love, the interconnectedness. It comes back, to me, it comes back so easily and so often in different contexts.
One of our guests, Charlotte Rotterdam, had spoken about compassion and mindfulness being a bit like tasting your own corner of the ocean, which the more aware of you are of your own corner, you realize all the corners are similar. So you have a deeper understanding of the whole thing by having a deeper understanding of what's inside.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. That's the only thing I can say to that. I wrote a story about 4 years ago after my eldest brother passed away, which had been sort of brewing in me for quite a while. It is a story to do with a liter of water. That's the story is about a liter of water that is taken from the sea, becomes an individual liter of water, and is extremely happy about being an individual in a plastic bag, in a Ziploc bag, 1 liter. And he feels so good about being himself. And then as I walk along the beach, because I'm telling the story, the plastic bag breaks. And there goes the liter of water. And he gets scared, but then he slowly disappears, and he is all over this bit of ocean and the ocean. And he is there. My liter of water is there all over the world.
Beautiful metaphor.
Yeah, that's the idea.
When you were in Pakistan, what was that experience like in terms of, was there a great deal of opposition?
One or two things I would like to share. I went there as a missionary. And a missionary in those days was somebody who goes to foreign countries, to those poor people who don't know Jesus and Christianity, and who should be converted. And I think I moved away from that idea well within a year after I got to Pakistan, because some way or other I started being, Pakistan is a country of 96% Muslims. And all these people in the street, you ask yourself, who the hell am I to think that I should tell them to change their way of life? What is this?
So it sounds like you showed up with this sort of classic missionary zeal, and then something shifted for you that which I give you credit for, because I think it would be very easy to kind of double down in your own views.
One thing that happened, of course, a few years after that, in 1963, what is called the Second Vatican Council happened in the Catholic Church. And that set off a whole lot of triggers in a whole lot of myself and of my colleagues, lots of my colleagues, who started thinking differently. Unfortunately, after the Vatican Council closed, whatever happened or was about to happen after that didn't happen, because the Catholic Church did step by step go back to where the conservative elements wanted to be. There's a very good chance now that things are getting better, have been getting better with our present day Francis, who took the name of Francis, by the way. He himself seems to clarify that he is a Jesuit from the Jesuit order. And they sometimes, the Franciscans and the Jesuits are the opposites on the spectrum of spirituality in the Catholic Church.
How does the Catholic Church reconcile its views with, for instance, you said that St. Francis of Assisi, seeing everything under the sun is our brothers and sisters. Does that match exactly with the official view of the Catholic Church, or does it allow for some diversity in views?
The Franciscan way of looking at things, the Franciscan theology, spirituality, is only one of the many streams of spirituality within the church. And it has never taken over the whole church as such, but it has always been an important influence in Catholic theology over the centuries. That it's just one of the ways in which you can be a Catholic.
You mentioned a while back that you sort of acknowledged that you had internalized some unhelpful self-talk, maybe from some of your Catholic upbringing too, some sort of self-recrimination, self-hate, regret, guilt, what have you. I know many people have had that experience growing up in not just the Catholicism, but many religious traditions, that people end up internalizing very harsh, sort of rules that they're eternally failing on in some way. It drives them away from religion generally. I'm just wondering for you, if you have any thoughts on that. You've managed to stay connected to your tradition in spite of having had that experience as well, it sounds like.
I don't think for myself that it has it's never been an overriding emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Our whole way of thinking within the Catholic Church, and much stronger in many of the non-Catholic Protestant traditions, they have it much more strongly, this sense of I'm a sinner, and God is the one who forgives me, and you pray God for his graceful forgiveness, and that as if God is the one who, the only thing God is the punisher of evil, of
Mm-hmm.
sin, and the rewarder of your good things you do. Over the years, I developed a different experience of this God, who is much more than just a punisher and a rewarder. That's not what in my religion God is about. Personally, I don't think I've ever really beaten myself up, but the prayers you said, I don't say prayers anymore, not much. It is, Our Father, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those. The forgiveness is a central but you can't have forgiveness unless there is something to be forgiven. So that is a central part of the experience. Christ died for our sins. That's a generally accepted way of putting it in Christian theology. He died for my sins, and I am guilty of him dying for my sins.
Right, eternally indebted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's part of it, but I don't think, and that's probably also part of the Franciscan way of looking at it. It's much more the matter of the gratitude for the good things, the experience of being loved by this God.
How does your experience being educated in a Christian context as a Franciscan friar, how does that connect with your experience of meditation?
The meditation on what I am, not so much asking yourself, what am I and what am I doing here, but taking into your both hands, saying, this is what I am. Thank you very much. Gratitude is an important part of that. Gratitude is from the original Latin, gratia, which is also the root of the word grace. So gratitude and grace are from the same origin. So in terms of an experience which finds a word for the experience, it goes back to the same root. That means they are related. Gratitude and grace are related. That's how I feel about language. The language comes from is giving a word to an experience. And if you have two different experiences that have originally the same word at its base, then you say those experiences are going hand in hand. They are related.
It helps you see a connection where you might not have seen one previously.
Right, right. Yeah, definitely.
So I'm struck by how central in your approach experience is.
Yeah.
And putting words to it, and sort of the superstructure of ideas, dogma, ideology is sort of secondary, and perhaps it can make it harder to connect with experience. Perhaps it can get in the way.
Oh yeah. Sometimes you're hooked onto a word without realizing what the word originally expresses. The word it's only a word.
Mm-hmm.
The word says something, means something, but the something it means, that's what counts, not the words. But one of the things in Catholic theology for a long time is that words have been what I would call canonized.
Mm-hmm.
This is the word you have to use. And if you use a different word, you're wrong. Never mind what the experience is or the reality is. And that happens sometimes. That words start living a life of their own without giving me a chance to go deeper and find out what originally the reality is expressed in that word.
And there's a similar danger with ritual, perhaps, where practices originally intended to give people an experience become empty.
Yeah.
What inspired you to begin meditation, the Buddhist version or the Hindu type of meditation? How did you get into that?
It was the first instance, that little book on Buddhism that I picked up when I must have been about 19 or 20. Later on, I got into a little more into the Hinduism part of it. And I don't know, it probably is something that appeals to you, and it does or it doesn't. But that's the same thing. You like fish head curry, or you don't. That's something about religion in general. You have a feeling for it or you don't. Or you have a very high developed sense of it or you don't. I compare it to people who are tone deaf and Ludwig van Beethoven. It is there or it isn't. I don't know.
How do you conceptualize God? Or do you?
Well, they are both valid questions. Do I? I tend to say no, I don't. I live and I am. And that's the God in me, as he is in everything else. I don't think I used to, of course, Our Father in Heaven, that's a conceptualization, creator of all things. The very fact that we talk about creation is a theological term. You're surprised to find it in scientific literature. They shouldn't use the theological language in science, as little as they should use scientific language in theology. It's two different ways of looking at it. It's two pictures. But over the years, when I was as a child, I probably got up in his heaven. I suppose I don't remember it, but most likely, what else was there for a child to hold on to? Being told about God, and you have to have some hold on that. But I don't think I think I'm moved away from conceptualization. It is what is.
Speaking of language, it sounds, I mean, sometimes just the way we are stuck talking about things makes it sound like there's a conceptualization there. Like when you say, he's with me, then he's with means he's separate, or he's a he and not a she, or what, but how else? Like we need different words or something, but then it creates this assumption that everyone is conceptualizing God as other and God as man and God as sitting on a cloud and all of that. Yeah.
When you talk about it, about God or the divine, or when you write about it, there's no other way than doing it by words.
Right.
So I've got right across from here, I've got my little bookshelf, one of them, and there is Mary Daly writes a book, Beyond God the Father. This is a feminist book, I tell you it is. And the moment I read it, the very title of the book, and he said, Mary, you're right. We are way beyond God the Father. And we are way beyond God the Mother.
Mm-hmm.
And we are way beyond God everything that you can conceptualize him and talk about him, write about him. In the end, you have to say he is everything or nothing and both. But at some point you talk about him, and then him comes easier for me because of my background, can't help it. But if anybody wants to talk about God as her, I'll understand the language.
Hans, do you notice any connections between your practice of self-compassion or meditation and any of your religious practices that you had been taught as a Franciscan?
I tend to go back in my memory to years gone by when I talk about my Franciscan religious practices, because I don't do them anymore as such. And I haven't done them for a long time. Even when I was still a friar, still a Franciscan in Pakistan, there wasn't anything special I did for that. And compassion, of course, is a given. That's one of those things you try to do. And the self-compassion, being happy with the guy you are, or the girl you are, I'm missing out on that because I'm not always very happy with who I am. And unfortunately, I tend to put that onto other people. They don't like me very much. And when you go into it and you say, what kind of reason do you have to think that they don't like you? I don't have those reasons. There's probably a leftover of those very early days when you were never quite good enough. And that's something in my upbringing. My dad was like that. I was, to put it that I have to put it carefully because that's how I am. I used to be a very good student. I was number one in my class for a number of years throughout. And in the first 6 years, the minor seminary, where I was in that boarding school from my 12th till my 18th, I would come home after year one over and year two was over, year two. And the tradition was that the results of the final exams of that particular year would be sent by mail to my parents. I wouldn't get that myself. And it was, of course, addressed to my dad. And of course, I can't open that letter, naturally. My dad would open the letter and he would look at it and he would say, oh, okay. Yeah. And then I had all, and that was high in our way of assessing exams and that sort of thing. I had all 8s and 9s and an occasional 10. That was the highest you could get. The 9s were out of reach for most of my classmates, and I had a number of them. And my dad never ever said, "Well done, fantastic, beautiful." You can't be proud, no? And I think that's where this whole sense of, I even hesitate what I said just now, that I was a damn good student. I can't help that. And I was.
So it sounds like, right, self-compassion is a work in progress in some ways, which
yes,
is true for all of us.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Well, thank you so much for this lovely conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's an experience for me.
Well, it's been wonderful to hear your thinking and your experiences. Really much appreciated.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and of yourself. Really, really much appreciated.
Thank you for listening to it all. Yeah.
Take care. Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.